just for the recording then, today this talk is about how stories, the role of stories in the way we understand and we live gestation in different places in the world and what difference it makes. Celebrating the topic of this panel, we will do what we do in some inspired activities that I participate. And instead of presenting the speakers for their work, I will present them for the stories that connected us. You can anyway access information about their work on the IIS website, where you have their bio, their profile, and links to their works. But I will bring a bit to a personal level and about how we connected and what brought us together here. And Mpume Gumede, who is just here by my side, is a practitioner and scholar in the field of reproductive health, to summarize it, in South Africa, but also with experience in different countries in Africa. We met for the first time in person this week, but it feels like we know each other for a long time already. And at least since 2021, I've heard of her through common contacts, mainly Colin Chasey. And she wrote an article for our compilation that I'm showing here. This is a compilation that we made after a seminar about the legacy of Paulo Freire in the field of communication and social change. And since then, we have been communicating and meeting online for dialogues and also on social networks. And this Tuesday, when we were preparing the roundtables that we had yesterday, and if you were not with us yesterday, I recommend that you watch the recordings online. And during the preparation on Tuesday, Mpume said that the reproductive health, and particularly the approach to gestation, is highly dominated by aid agencies and by an Eurocentric vision. And so I hope today we'll be able to listen more about how this happens and what it means. What are the stories that come when you have a field dominated by aid international agencies, and what it means for people practicing health and for people living gestations? What does the stories mean to them, and how possible it is to break these histories, these stories? So I hope you will bring some light to what you started to tell us on Tuesday related to this. Åsa Virdi Kroik, who is also with us here, is an indigenous woman and scholar in the field of religion, although I think this term is quite short to define what you do. We met through her written words. We were looking for an indigenous voice for the ecologist panel. I work with indigenous in Latin America, but it was, we were facing some challenges to bring someone from there to these panels, and then we started to look for other suggestions closer to us. And Pandora found Åsa's article and shared it with the team organizing. She found the article that is named Working Together with South Sami Birth Stories. That is this one, and I do recommend you to read it if you didn't yet. We read it and we loved it. And then what happened, our relationship started with me kind of stalking her. Because I started to send messages to everywhere that had a trace of her presence, co-authors and social networks. And I'm happy that she accepted our invitation and not, instead of bringing me to court for chasing her so much. And this week she has been sharing so many stories about Sami traditions and their dialogue, not always peaceful, with Western stories. And so I hope she will unfold some of these stories. And I ask myself, how do we, or how can we inscribe modern stories within a longer ancestral story of gestation? Is it possible to make this dialogue between modern stories and ancestral stories? And then we have Lindsay Barnes, and I start saying that I thought I knew how to pronounce her name, but then she said that it's quite challenging. And every time I say her name, I ask myself, am I saying it right? And Lindsay is a health practitioner in a rural village in India. And yesterday she got me when I wrote medicine together with her name in the roundtable ecologies. I was already trying a Freudian approach there. Instead of institutionalizing the speakers and putting institutions together with their names, I was putting fields of practice. But she got me and said, well, maybe medicine is also a short term for what she does in her practice. And I met her through a web of connections. In her case, we were trying to find grassroots voices to bring for the conversations about gestations. And Sangeeta, who is here, suggested a couple of names from India. We started with Dr. Rani Bank, and she could not come because of health issues. And then we started a conversation with Dr. Manisha Gupte, who initially accepted the invitation, and we started to have quite a nice conversation about the work she does in India. But finally, she could not come also because of health issues and in her family. And we were so already engaged with this kind of practice, and we asked Manisha if she could suggest someone doing some kind of similar work. And she suggested Lindsay. And I'm saying here that to highlight that Lindsay is here not as a last option, but as a fruit of a very beautiful web of connections. Because we were speaking with very strong and important women that are all connected through a very strong work in the grassroots, in the ground. And I think she brings, in a certain way, these connections to the table. The connections between these women, the connections with the grassroots, and I'm happy that we eventually met and that Lindsay is here. And the first time I met Lindsay to talk about the gestation event, she told me, I did a PhD, but never came back to academia after that. And if I recall well, I think she told me that she didn't even go to pick her certificate. And she's staying in India, where she did her field work and extended this work in so many different ways. And she asked me, when we were talking about the roundtables, about the events, if she could talk about stories that are part of her practice. And yes, she did it already. And I hope that today she will tell us a bit more about the stories. And I ask myself, how do traditional and medical stories marry or maybe divorce and make gestations easier or more challenging in her practice in the ground in India? So coming from these stories, these personal stories, or the small part of these personal stories that I know from our connections, I would like now to pass the word to you so we can share more stories and talk together. And Mpume, would you like to start, please?
Thank you. Greetings everyone, both here and online. So in reflecting around stories that have or reflections around the theme of gestation, I am drawn back to my own personal upbringing. So I have just a list of names, and I'll tell a couple of stories around these names, and then connect that back to the theme, the gestation theme. So I am the fourth of 7 children, and my father had 2 brothers and 1 sister. His one brother had 1 son, and his other brother didn't have children at all. So growing up, we in my community, the understanding is that a child is not the biological mother's child only, right? And so as much as when children are orphaned, they will be taken over by relatives. Similarly, when parents don't have children, the family reorganizes itself so that everyone has children. So in my context, my father's brother is not an uncle. He is my father. So he's just the younger father, or the older father, or the middle father, second father, you know. So my younger father also had 7 children, well, 8 children, because my middle father had 1 son. And so growing up, we were in and out of any of these homes. Essentially, we stayed in my mother's and father's household. But for significant events, for summer holidays, we would be everywhere. So my sisters would be at some other home. I would be at my younger father's home. And that was for us just a normal way. It was something that we observed around us. It wasn't unique to my family. On my mother's side, my mother's sister also did not have children. So just so that children could be distributed amongst everyone. My mother's sister was a school teacher at the school that I went to, and she stayed at a cottage that was attached to the school. So it was quite convenient for me to stay with her, because then there'd be no transport costs to get to school. Yeah, and so myself and my sister spent a considerable amount of time at my mother's sister's house, living as her children. So wherever we are at the time, the terminology that we use is mother and father. So when you're called, you don't say aunt, or, you respond, yes, ma, yes, baba, which is the term that we use for father. Similarly, when, so there's also other siblings that I had who are not my biological mother's children, but that grew up with us. So that we're part of this constant moving around these different homes. So Thokozani and Tando were also the biological mothers, were relatives, but they grew up with us. My mother was also a school teacher, so they were going to the school where my mother was teaching at primary school level. And so they also grew up with us, also referring to my mom as mom. When I got married, my aunt-in-law, her husband died, and she was going through a difficult time. So her son, her firstborn son, is the same age as my firstborn daughter. So we took him over. If I had to show family pictures, even on my phone, Tammy is with us. On Mother's Day, he calls me. He's 30 now. He calls me and says, "Happy Mother's Day." And I mean, there's so many. I mean, there's Gumede at my husband's household. My father-in-law was a school principal, and Gumede was a learner at his school. And Gumede's home circumstances were quite challenging and difficult. So my father-in-law took him over. So Gumede also grew up with my husband and his siblings, and he's part of the family. So whenever, if someone dies and the family needs to get together and contribute, Gumede is part of that network. His biological mother is still alive. So if anything happens in his biological household, we all rally together around Gumede to assist in whatever way. Even if there's a celebration, it's all of us. So I tell this story around this idea of kinship and family, because I think when we talk about gestation, we are very much thinking about the biological state of gestation, of pregnancy. And I think even for me, working in the field of sexual and reproductive health, and with the foreign aid that comes in, and the framing of the family being this nuclear family. And so interventions are designed to target this nuclear family, which in my context, the whole concept of family is quite fluid. You don't have to have biological children to be a mother. we had Mother's Day last week, and for Mother's Day, every woman gets celebrated as a mother, regardless of whether they physically born children or not. And so I think the challenge for us as practitioners working in the field is that foreign aid comes in with targets for numbers, comes in with, so if I can make an example, if a program, for example, targets adolescent girls and young women, and there is a component that targets the parents of these adolescent girls and young women, the conceptualization is that these are biological parents of these adolescent girls and young women. And so there's additional burden on someone to prove that I am a parent. Even around the whole discourse around adoption, in South Africa, there's, in the media everywhere, this talk of the need for people to put their names to adopt or to foster children, and you must do it legally. And for us, it's quite foreign because this is something that we've been doing anyway. It's how we are living. The legal aspect becomes an unnecessary burden to have to register someone so that if it's a child, if I have to interact with the child's school, I have to produce some kind of document that shows that I'm a legal guardian. And so I think my whole struggle with these different knowledge systems and the almost enforcement of this Western knowledge system that says that if you say you are family, you need to look like this, then becomes highly problematic. As part of my work, what I've explained, you do find in South Africa quite a strong nuclear family pattern starting to emerge even amongst indigenous African people in the country, to a point where it was necessary at some stage in my career for us to put together a book which was titled Owami Owako, which means she is my, another thing in my language, we don't have she and he. So O is just anyone. He or she is my child. He or she is your child. And another one was titled Bangabetu, which means they are ours. And it was an attempt to remind people almost that, it was the early days of HIV, or not really early, middle days of HIV, when people were dying of AIDS and children were left orphaned. So it was an effort to remind communities that they are ours. So remember, they are ours, by the way. So because we were seeing a lot of child-headed households, but even with those, even the term that child-headed households, all of those came about because there was already this erosion of communal living, with people moving to cities for work opportunities, and so on. And so you would then start to find households where it was just the children by themselves. And so we did this campaign around Bangabetu, they are ours, sort of to remind communities that this is how we live, by the way. no one is supposed to be left by themselves. So for me or for us, the concept is not necessarily to look after orphaned children, but the concept is really around, and it goes back to the concept of Ubuntu, which is umuntu ngumuntu ngabantu, which translates a person is a person because of other people. So that's a sense of Ubuntu holds the community together. In my PhD thesis, there is a section. Okay, so it explored the whole thing of communication around. I'm not sure how much time I have.
If you can use around 2 or 3 more minutes.
Okay. So around COVID-19 and communication around COVID-19. I see Prof. Eliza, my supervisor, is online. Thank you for being here, Prof. I also explore this concept of Ubuntu because COVID-19 came with these lockdowns and prevention of attending funerals. And when in my conversations with communities that are part of my study, people were saying, we can't not go to a funeral. We can't not be there for our neighbors. We'd rather risk COVID, we'd rather be sick with COVID than not, than stay home, than stay away. And so, again, in my thesis, I argue against this transposition of Eurocentric health communication messages that just completely ignore people's ways of being, people's ways of knowing, people, the way in which people do life, so to speak. So I use the Pen3 cultural model, which says that, working with the people's culture, you need to be aware that there are positive things in the culture, there are neutral things in the culture, that, and then there are negative things within the cultural context. And so you can't always just treat culture as a barrier. You need to, and you achieve that by working with communities. And I think maybe later we can get back to the discussion that you started around participatory action research. How do we actualize that in a way that gives voice to the communities that we. Thank you.
Thank you, Mpume. How do you connect?
Me?
Yeah, if you will. You can engage to the conversation wherever you see fits.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking of where, I mean, we were talking in the morning between these two silos of, Western so-called scientific obstetrics and traditional indigenous practices. And they don't seem to speak to each other. Their language is also very different, even if you have people speaking in the same so-called language. I think, there's really very little common ground. And I would like to share my sort of introduction to childbirth from the placenta, because the placenta in our villages and in traditional birthing practices is a very powerful, probably more powerful than the fetus. And it is given enormous amount of reverence for the power that it holds. I mean, I will talk now about how I got introduced to the placenta. I had 2 babies of my own by then, and I didn't consider the placenta to be anything to be revered or really thought about much. My babies were born in hospitals. But when I was doing home births in the 90s, early 90s, it was the placenta which seemed to be, it disturbed the birth the most. It had to be very carefully cared for. And a couple of births I was called to where the baby was born and the baby was fine, but the placenta was not being delivered. And so this was my introduction to the placenta. And the villagers believe that the cord should not be cut until the placenta is delivered. So, and also in those days of the 90s, as I said yesterday, it was a period of floods where the traditional midwives were not attending women in the night. So they would keep the baby and the placenta together until several hours, until the village midwife would come in the morning and cut the cord. And so if the baby was born, and the baby was born in 2 cases I went to in the night, the baby was already born and the placenta was inside, and there was no way you could cut the cord, to try and do something about the placenta. And so in both these cases, nothing very serious happened. In one case, it was the placenta was just sitting there in the vagina, and I just had with the baby still there, and she was actually severely dehydrated and hungry was the woman, and they were so bothered about the placenta and it's not coming out, and if it doesn't come out, it may go up into the abdomen and go up into the chest, and the woman may die. So they were more bothered about the placenta killing the mother than really addressing the problem of the mother, which she had not eaten for 24 hours and she was seriously dehydrated. And I saw in the corner her mother-in-law, it was early morning, they started cooking the rice. And I said, can you give me a glass of the rice water? And so the mother-in-law gave a glass of rice water to her daughter-in-law, and she drank it very quickly, and there was a few grains of rice at the bottom. So she got the glass and she just like this. She was like not missing 3 or 4 grains of rice at the bottom of the glass. I said, when was the last time you ate? She said, like yesterday morning. And I said, do you want some more rice to eat? And this was completely taboo. I didn't even know it was taboo. But that's how the taboo went. And so I got a plate of hot rice, and she sat there with the placenta inside and the baby attached, and she had to squat because she couldn't lie down and eat the rice. So she squatted, she ate this rice, and she felt much better. And I just went like this, and the placenta plopped out. So this gave me an introduction to the placenta. And there was another case where later on the family, so how they create new myths, that I was informed that the placenta had gone up into the throat. And I went and I sort of got some oil and did some massage, as they do, and they thought that I massaged the placenta down from the throat and out. So this These were my introduction to the placenta. And later on, I mean, there's a whole lot of rituals which are how you deal with the placenta, not only in the body but out. Once the placenta is born, it is given due respect, and they bury it inside the room where the birth takes place. It's very risky to dispose of the placenta outside, because if somebody may steal it. There are stories, the traditional midwives will tell you that, people come and say, can we buy the placenta from you? And they do things with the placenta for, making medicines out of it, for treating women with infertility. And if you lose your placenta, then you will not have any more children. So this placenta has to be, kept inside and guarded. So they bury it inside the house. And then they burn a fire over it for 6 days. And the dye will come for 6 days, and she will use the heat from the fire for heating some leaves, which are used to do fomentation of the abdomen, which is to help the uterus to contract. So this heating on top of the placenta, it serves two purposes if you want to look at it scientifically. It fumigates the house because they burn leaves on it like me. So it fumigates the house. It creates heat for the mother and the baby. And it also it burns the placenta, which is buried inside. And when they bury the placenta, they also do a puja to the placenta, and they put grains of rice and haldi and inside the pit, and it is properly taken care of. And the cord of the baby, when it falls off, that also has to be kept for 6 days. If it falls off before 6 days, then you keep the cord. And on the 6th day, you go to the local pond, take a bath, and do another puja there. And they wrap up the cord, which is dropped off, in a bowl of mud, and then they throw it into the middle of the pond. So that also, nobody can steal the cord, and nobody can steal the placenta. In fact, if a woman who has not had a baby and she wants a baby, they will get the baby with the placenta all intact, without cleaning the baby, full of blood and whatever, and they will put it into the lap of the woman who doesn't have a baby. And if that baby is going to be given to her, then she has to hold the baby and keep it with her, and not show any sign of like, what do you say, horror or
Disgust
at this blood covered baby and placenta. If you do, then you cannot be the mother of the baby. So the baby the placenta is a very powerful, more powerful than the fetus in the uterus, I think, as well as after the birth. And this led me, so I was very much interested in all this. And there was a couple of cases where the dais told me that if the baby isn't breathing at birth, they take the placenta and heat it. In our area, they put the placenta in hot water, and then they milk the cord from the fetus, from the placenta, to the fetus. And this apparently revives a stillborn, a seemingly stillborn baby. And I did this myself a few times. And because we don't have any seemingly stillborn babies, but I think it works. And I mean, this was my anecdotal experience of the heating the placenta. And then I talked to several other people in India, and they also reported this heating the placenta to revive stillborn babies from South India, from Chhattisgarh, and then we looked worldwide, and there are instances, anecdotal in stories about heating the placenta from South America, from France, from various places in Southeast Asia, Indonesia. They're all, it's like under the radar, these stories of placental, using the placenta. And in the, around 10, 15 years ago, a group of us then got together and we formed a collective called the Jiva Collective. We had a project of studying this phenomena of placental heating, and it did get published in some places. It was because it has huge public health possibilities if this works. So Jiva means life. The placenta is known as, it's called Phul, which is a flower. So the placenta is known as a Phul, and the fetus is the fruit. So that's the phul, and this is the Phul. And we have also in our villages, we have Phul brothers and Phul sisters, and where they give flowers to each other, which are also symbolic of the placenta. So it's like sharing your placentas, and these Phul brothers and Phul sisters, they have to be of different communities. You have to have your Phul of a different caste or a different religion. So my sons both are Phul brothers. And Phul brothers and Phul sisters, they are your go-to people in times of real emergencies, because maybe in your immediate family, you cannot manage this emergency. So this is somebody external to your family setup. So this placenta, it's growing. It's got tentacles growing all over the place. So this is my experience or my story about the placenta. And in Western obstetrics, the placenta is also used. They use placenta for making medicines. It's full of hormones. It is, I think Western medicine also acknowledges it's a very powerful. It's not just a mass of blood clots, and it's a very powerful thing. And it's very strange that these two histories don't speak to each other. Both the tradition as well as the modern, they acknowledge the power of the placenta, but they don't speak to each other about it. So I'm just sharing my experience of both. And yeah, I think that's my story
Thank you.
for the day.
Thank you. It's your story also this day.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm Celestina. I just want to take time to acknowledge the land here and all the people that has ever stepped on this land, ever shape they are now as ancestors. Well, there's a lot of wisdom here. And there's a lot of things to threads that I could follow up. But I think I would like to follow up. I think I would like to discuss a little on what is a story, because there is so many different ideas of what stories is. And in Sápmi we have a lot of, no, not a lot, well, yes, a lot of scholars nowadays that are discussing stories and what story it is. And when I defended my dissertation before that, I was really had to go through carefully how I use the word story. In my opinion, I think you could go anywhere there is, for instance, you can talk about the body as a story, with scars, with stories and stories, like the body tell you the story how you got the scar. Maybe you have a tattoo, maybe your hair became gray one day. It's all story. If you talk to Lisa Finbo, who graduated a few ago, she became a PhD a couple of years ago. She talks about the Gumede, or the traditional customs story. She's a Dutta herself, which means she's doing handicraft, traditional handicraft, which is very common, still ongoing in Sápmi today. Yeah, she talks a lot of story. In my thinking, maybe this is to go a little bit too far. I stick to, well, it depends on what I want to discuss, but I like to talk about stories. Well, one more thing, modern stories. When you listen to the radio, the news, I think that the journalist is always handing a story on to you. It's modern stories that we're used to, I was used to listen to as facts. Today we're not doing that anymore, God. And also narrative theory comes close to the way I think about story. And narrative theory is variation of that. And I am welcoming that very much, I think. Myself, well, one more thing. I think about dreams. Maybe that is the field I should go into. Dreams bring up stories, and dreams are extremely powerful. And I think you should not stop to talk every morning about dreams, because and give each other stories about dreams, because that's a communication to the other world. And that is something people did, but it seems like it's disappearing among us. It's not so common anymore. But as I said yesterday, I think I got that, yeah, that the child would be claimed by an ancestor, and that ancestor showed it herself or himself in a dream to the mother. I don't think, did I tell you about my own experience? No, I don't think so. When I was pregnant with my child, I was paying attention to my dreams, and an ancestor that I still remember, who is now dead, spoke up for me against my father. And I think, and he was actually doing a very good job in my dream. And my father was very humble and loved me very much and shouldn't actually be needed. But in this case, I don't know what it was about this particular ancestor did. So I took the name Jeremias and turned it into a female version. I agreed with my Indian husband about this, and we discussed it carefully and gave it to our daughter. She's called Jenny Yavit. Yeah, so yeah, I could tell you stories about the placenta, so but I think I want to stop here. Let's leave room for discussion.
Okay, thank you, Åsa. So we have comments or questions here or online too.
Okay, I have a sort of, I probably have like a few comments, observations, maybe questions. I mean, first of all, thank you so much. It's really nice to hear. I think the idea behind this week has been that we could sort of unravel some of these larger ideas, and especially in the roundtable format yesterday, you know, it felt like everyone has their brief time to speak, and then, you know, a substantial amount of time seemingly for discussion. But like, was it you, Lindsay, who said, someone said that's the problem with with academia, is you're always on a timetable. And it's so true, and we take it for granted. And I think that goes totally, you know, it's completely at odds with the type of storytelling that you're all engaging in and talking about. But I mean, just like an initial thought, observations about the placenta, it's really interesting. This focus and you know, even more important than the fetus. But I was also struck about the idea of it wandering through the pregnant person's body. And I mean, the ancient Greeks believed that the womb itself traveled through the woman's body, right? And that's where the term hysteria brought up, this traveling womb. And I was just, I mean, I haven't really thought it through, but I wonder if there's, like, I wonder what the sort of meaning is behind that belief, and like what it says about a woman or her body, or a pregnancy, or birth. I don't know what's going on there, if that's a coincidence or if there's some sort of connection between, I mean, like the Greeks saw, you know, women as vessels for babies, and there wasn't an understanding that, like, it was like the man implanted the baby in, and the woman was just there to sort of grow it, or carry it, rather than, you know, any part coming from her own physiology. Which, like, maybe goes hand in hand with the womb also having sort of a mind of its own, being disconnected in a way from the woman's body.
Yeah, I mean, it was initially difficult for me to get these things in my head, because I have got this like Western, you know, European mindset, you know, of you know, how we learn biology in school, and then but I go back to the placenta. if I look at most of the complications of during pregnancy and childbirth, it seems to be it's the placenta that's sort of messing things up. And I sometimes, give some choice of use words to the placenta, because if you look at in Western obstetrics, you'll see things like eclampsia. They say it's the placenta for, all the major problems of, as soon as the placenta is removed, the mother becomes, her blood pressure goes back to normal, her blood sugar goes back to normal. Or, women who are dying in childbirth of hemorrhage. The main reasons why women are still dying in pregnancy, it's invariably the placenta, which is somehow not doing its job properly. The mother is fine, the fetus is fine, but this powerful placenta in the middle of it all, that is, it's no wonder it has to be treated with due respect, because it's a life giver and it's a life taker. More than the womb, more than the fetus, more than the mother. It can kill both. It also gives sustenance to both. That is why I sort of wanted to sort of focus on this. And it resonates both with both traditional practice as well as modern practice. This is why I brought this in, because I was saying the silos. This placenta, it's got tentacles in both silos. It should speak to each other. Whereas, maybe some other traditional practices maybe don't so much, but this, I think, is it's so powerful. It should bring people together. I think that's the role of the placenta anyway. My follow-up, draw it a little, to an extent.
Yeah, exactly. My follow-up question, but I'll let someone else ask it. Question, or comment maybe, is just that why is the placenta so overlooked in Western medicine and culture? Maybe it's acknowledged within the literature, the important role it plays, but sort of cultural attitudes towards it is like, check it out, or quick, let's get it out of the, after the baby's born, and then and like it's very rarely talked about in my experiences with pregnancy. I didn't have that knowledge.
I think for me it's just the openness to what you regard as valid knowledge. So this knowledge exists, but because of where it originates from, it's disposable knowledge. It's knowledge that could possibly advance the field of medicine significantly, but because it originates from a certain knowledge system, then it's not regarded as valid. And I think at the risk of speaking on your behalf, Lindsay, from the conversations we've been having, dinner and breakfast, out of these formal sessions, really, Lindsay's point is really about, when, what we find instead is that when this knowledge gets to be known, it must be repackaged and not acknowledged for where it comes from. Must be repackaged. It's like, in South Africa, Jan van Riebeeck discovered South Africa as if it wasn't there before he came. So it's just this insistence to believe that for knowledge to be valid needs to originate from a certain source, and other sources are then, not valid sources of knowledge.
I just sort of, Lindsay, you didn't really mention it in the same way, but it has actually not so much the placenta, but the fact that you shouldn't cut the cord immediately. That's something that's now finally acknowledged in Western medicine, and that it's beneficial to resuscitate a baby with the cord intact, and that a third of the baby's blood can be in the placenta if you cut the cord too early. And all this additional blood mainly goes into the lung tissue, which helps the baby to take its first breath. So all these things, actually, the fact that the dye didn't turn up probably did the baby a lot of good, because it,
But even had the dye come, she would not have cut the.
she wouldn't have cut it.
We also don't cut the placenta, cut the cord until the baby's out, because it's generally sort of.
But if the placenta stays in, because there can be a way that it's so embedded in the uterus it can't come out, how does the mother present when she dies, and maybe it does look as if the placenta has taken her over, or, if you're watching someone die because the placenta hasn't come up. I don't know, I'm just thinking of.
Fortunately, I've never seen.
No,
die.
I wouldn't want to.
Let me, I have also many questions and things running around my mind right now. But when listening to this last hit, I wonder about the transfer and the translation, because Lindsay, you said something that was quite important. Even if you speak the same language, there is very little common ground. And I'm interested in the process of transfer of this knowledge. In a certain way, of your 3 cases, because you are dealing with some kind of knowledge that is not just now, but is facing a contact with colonizer knowledge, because the books, because the training is coming from a different language or a different knowledge. And what happens, how do you see in your communities, in your surroundings, is it still strong? Can you still speak about this knowledge with the same easiness? I don't know if this. Is it easy to defend traditional ideas because now it's even easier because people can find online materials if there is not a formal training. This can be confronted with information that can be seen as more valid or more valued because it comes from this building, this important building in London. Just to name this. So I'm interested in the transfer and the challenges the transfer may face.
Can I take that? So done. Dissertation about that. About many things, but transference of knowledge is one of the important things that I discussed. And you were asking, can you speak openly and with ease about it? No, you can't, because you have to use a language. And if you are changing your language, you will lose knowledge, or your knowledge will come out differently. And I am constantly struggling with words like religion, like soul, sacred. And so is everybody else with my background. we have seen an efflorescence with documentation and an increasing interest among our people to preserve knowledge and to start to ask people, elder people. But I have realized that, well, actually, it's not about the elder people. You have so much knowledge preserved, you have to put it together. And one thing that keeps coming up and is often talked about is silent knowledge. And it's a concept very often coming up, and we are constantly using it because we can't talk about it, so we're doing it. And that goes in various ways. I was, like, for instance, Lisa Ragnar, that I mentioned, Finnbook is talking about handcraft and how knowledge is transferred that way. Stories. Wow. Yeah. I'm a fan of her work. Myself, I discussed knowledge about spirituality. I struggle with the words religion, spiritualities, whatever, and that is rarely talked about. And people kept coming up to me and saying, "Are they talking to you about that?" "Yeah, no problem," I said. "Yeah, I had no problem. It's partly because who I am, and they knew me, but honestly, I had knowledge about that, and once they realized that, it was very difficult. But people talk to me very openly in small groups or one-to-one, but there is not very little of an open discussion, and I suffer a lot by not having a forum for discussing my research results. And I think I'm going to come back to you, Jack. I love the question there. I have been using Indigenous research methodology, and I have read Sean Wilson, and I have read Linda Dwight-Smith and Margaret Kovacs and Hanani K. Trask and Rauna Kokkonen and so many others. And I have my own experience of ethics, and that you start from the community and you work with the community and you go back to the community. And I speak so warmly about that. And you were bringing up some difficulties that we maybe can talk about more later on. But I want to talk about my difficulties. I consider myself a failure. I did manage to do my research. It was suffering, I was crying, and I had to break taboos. I had to write down things that were oral, and I was crying because I'm not supposed to do that. And all these kind of things. And eventually I ended up defending my dissertation successfully. And after that, I was going to hand it back. Well, what do? I made a popular version of my dissertation. And I mean, I know how to distribute because I have a publishing house. So what happened after that? No. And that is something that I would like to discuss somewhere, and I don't know where, but I am open. I like very much the idea as a method to bring out your failures and reflect on them. Indigenous research methodology is pretty new as research, and we are talking about how it should be ethically. And I thought I was doing everything right, but in the end, Or maybe my mind is wrong. Maybe I have succeeded. I'm actually trying to find people to talk to. That's what I do. Does it make sense to you?
Yeah, I mean, the Jiva research project I was involved with 15 years ago. We did so much of research and so much of work and interviewing endless numbers of dies. After getting all this together, and it got nowhere.
Oh,
Yeah, I mean, our hope of impacting the public health discourse, it could be a very useful. I mean, it should have prompted maybe some people in some medical institutions or bureaucracy to let's see this. It's potentially it's a very easy, very cheap. Anybody can do it sort of technique. It's not, you don't need, expensive ventilators to revive your newborn baby. This could be a technique which could be used in many remote health centers where they don't have access to this sort of technology. But this is very low cost, big potential, no impact. So I brought it up here.
what are we just stating something?
It was been staging for 15 years.
Such a station's going on.
The placenta has been growing for 15 years.
Could I raise a point that I think links a few of those? There's an interesting discussion in South Africa right now around absentee fatherism, that a lot of the perception that a lot of African men are not taking care of their children. Then if you look at the data, there's an interesting trend of where they get the data. They go to the mines, they go to the factories, and they interview Black Africans and say, do you have a child? They say, yes. How often do you go home? Once every 6 months, because I have to work. So then they log that as absentee fatherism. And then they say to the government, look, there's this big problem. And the government has spoken on this. They've said, oh, we have this big problem. But then even to Mpume's story, as you've just shared, and it's funny how even that story may have better informed government policy. The family structure is not nuclear. So it's not that those children are maybe suffering as much as we perceive them to be, because they have an uncle, they have a grandfather, they have a grandmother, they have the sisters and their mother, and it's a different fluid structure as you share. So it's not even that the Western knowledge not acknowledging the indigenous knowledge systems is a problem. It is the misuse of the Western knowledge. They're not even doing their due diligence. And you can see it informing public policy negatively. And then I can only imagine how difficult that must be on those fathers, where they have to go work in the mines or whatever because of the economic structures that are presented to them. But then they also maybe get given a sense of guilt because you're not the fathers. That's like, why not? I'm convinced, and like when you see that both being misidentified as a problem and the solution being misidentified, I think from sitting here, I think it's quite sad. But it speaks to the power of storytelling, that just a story told by one or two people to the right person could be enough to change the discourse.
I mean, he's spot on. Yeah, and I think it's one of those challenges that we're constantly facing, misdiagnosis of challenges to the point where stuff then starts to inform policy, but it's just missed the mark completely. I mean, also just to pick up on this question of how does it get translated? How does it? I mean, I don't know. I see Professor Deo is online, and I know she's done championed a lot of work on working with the Khoisan in South Africa and other indigenous communities. So I'm not sure if she might want, she spearheads community engagement at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. So I think there might be something to learn from some of your experiences, Professor Gill. Sorry to put you on the spot.
I'm sorry. I think I heard most of that conversation. I think it was Ben who probably made the statement, Ben who I met a few months ago when I was there at Loughborough. And I think that's what he said was exactly spot on. And I'm sorry, Mpume, someone had just walked into my office when you were speaking, but then I heard you raise my name. I didn't hear exactly what you said afterwards. I was a bit distracted.
So the whole discussion is around how the knowledge that you generate out of engaging with Indigenous communities. I think my two colleagues are talking about the experiences of when all of that knowledge is generated, the evidence is there, but nothing comes of it. It's totally still disregarded. Sometimes even to a point where there's not even an opportunity to share it back.
Feedback.
Yeah, feedback to communities.
Yes, yes. So, and I think that what I have heard from this roundtable and everyone sitting there would definitely agree that, when speaking and researching with local and Indigenous peoples and people who are, we could say, far removed from the academic spaces, it's probably preaching to the choir here because you're all aware of it. So I fear I might just be reinstating something. But, in actually designing a research project, it's always very, very vital to make sure that the expectations on all parties, because we do rely on donorship, right? So if we are doing kind of research, we have some form of funding, and we live in a world where we do have measures and counting and monitoring and evaluation, but there needs to be from the very, very beginning, very clear expectations on all people to the party of what they actually want from the project. And so when we're speaking, obviously, to people who are living in possibly marginal spaces, in under-resourced spaces, what they want is not necessarily what funders want. So it's very, very important to know what that is. And over and above, just perhaps providing feedback in literary forms or even in sort of presentation forms, we need to have use value coming out of the research that we do. We need to be able to possibly publish booklets that can help with understanding or transforming curriculum or helping people in marginal spaces hold an art exhibition, or it's just, it's the little things that could somehow have a great value, because we do focus a lot of the attention here in our CCMS unit on much more kind of micro and local spaces, but it's the bit by bit that does help, and setting a standard of ethical research, knowing that, as researchers, I think the majority of people sitting in the room are clearly very aware of the ethics that we should have, but then really doing it afterwards, mobilizing it and doing it. Mpume, sorry, I'm speaking too much. The community engagement component at UKZN, finally, we are sort of being seen as not only sort of the poor cousin of, there's teaching, research, and community engagement, but it's actually now being seen as like integral to both teaching and research, not just the sort of tag on afterthought. I don't know if I answered your question. I'll disappear now. Thank you.
Thank you, Laurie.
But I'm still listening.
So I think it's, I'm responding to a couple of things that Anna mentioned, and this long gestation that the Jiva project has had. So what I'm trying to understand is there is, of course, this question of transfer of knowledge, but what I'm curious to know is, what are those conversations like, right? When you take an alternative and not alternative in the sense of a different worldview and a different knowledge system that you take to this modern spaces and modern medicine, for example. What are the conversations that you've had? What is this? And somehow this, what I'm hearing from the room is that the onus seems to be on you to educate this group of people, right? And to validate your knowledge and to validate the worldviews that you bring. So I just wanted to hear a bit more about what is that experience like? I mean, Lindsay clearly sounds exhausted with this process of educating people, right? So,
I mean, these two silos are not equal silos. There's one very powerful, dominant one, which is it's like a bulldozer which crushes things en route. So when we speak to, when you're talking about sort of traditional practice, any practice apart from the placenta stuff, when you're speaking to the powers that be, you speak in their language. They will not speak to you in your language because they're the dominant ones. So you constantly have to translate from your worldview into their worldview in order for the discourse to happen. They will not get down from there, or not down, I would say they won't move sideways because it's not a hierarchy here in my understanding. In their worldview, it's a hierarchy. In my worldview, it's a duality. But then, when you're speaking to power, how do you speak? If I talk in the worldview of the Dais, they'll just like a fly on your shoulder, just flick you off. So it's so then, the Dais, we had 600,000 Dais in India until a decade ago. Enormous amount of knowledge and skills and, experience. And their knowledge is going, almost gone. And there's no sort of, I don't see it happening that their worldviews are talking to a Western obstetric trained or scientific so-called background people. It's very sad. And I think sometimes we maybe they need, I don't know, maybe they need sort of spokesperson who acts as a sort of intermediary between the two. In the Jiva project, we have two medical doctors. One was Meera Satgopal.
Meera, okay.
And one was Imrana Kadir. So it's not that the Jiva collective was like backs like me. We had proper doctors. But even then and they helped translate this into a language that people could, without the Dais worldview, they could understand. I mean, Meera wrote a whole article about entering into the Dais world. You have to see the world from where they are and how they see it, so that you can understand this whole phenomena and their skills and their knowledge. But how many people will make that effort? You have to enter their world. You will not enter theirs. It's power.
And there's also then an ongoing kind of delegitimization of that worldview, right? When you do away with 600,000 Dais at one go, and you kind of rendering them invalid, right? That knowledge system and that wisdom that they had, you're kind of. So there's also, there's of course the so-called Western influence, but there's also this internal colonization that continues to happen, right, within. When you speak about the context of India, for example. So you're doing away with, you're invalidating a whole system of knowledge. And when you, for example, do away with 600,000 Dais, what happens then? There's that erasure that happens, right? And then what happens if you ever want to revive it? Where will that knowledge come from?
It will get reinvented and imported. And then it will be held in due respect. So delayed cord cutting, squatting in labor, all these things which are now getting reinvented and re-imported, and then that's okay because it's coming back to us from the West.
And it's
But it's not coming from our indigenous practices which were there. I mean, a simple thing for getting the placenta, if it's a delayed placenta delivery, they just get a few hairs of the hair and they put it in the back of the throat of the mother, and the mother gags, and the placenta drops out. And it's just such a simple procedure. Why can't it? We use it all the time. We use it all the time, and we're using many of these things in our center. And now doctors are coming to our center to learn. So it's a drop in the ocean. But we're keeping some traditions alive.
I do think it speaks to the interesting one of when you speak to people in the West and they've heard of an idea from indigenous communities, they've usually heard it in a book written by a white person. You know what I mean? Like they're like, someone came back, 7 things I learned in India, and they'll say something, and it's like, okay, like maybe it's a good thing that some of these ideas are broadening up, but yeah, that academic or that author is getting the payment for the book and the citations and the da-da-da-da. And there's a risk, I think, of that mistranslation, the misappropriation of the ideas. And like in Mpume, you mentioned earlier, Ubuntu, that's becoming a buzzword these days. Like people are misusing it. I saw talk the other day, because I mean, from my understanding, and I've only been able to access it in what written work there is, but it's one of those concepts. It's hard to write in English. It's not. People say it's a philosophy, but then there's pushback around. It's more reflexive than that. There was talk of someone using Ubuntu in a car advert, being like Range Rover, bringing communities together, keeping Ubuntu alive. And I'm like, that like I would argue that not understanding Ubuntu and saying I don't understand Ubuntu is far better than doing that. That seems catastrophic.
Absolutely.
So like people have taken the idea of, we need to hear more indigenous knowledge. So let me grab it up, let me commodify it and put it in my books and share it to the world.
The same thing's happening with natural childbirth, which is now true. Want a natural childbirth in India? No problem. There are practitioners, and they'll sort of on their website, it's all very nice, and we have all these indigenous techniques and this, that, and the other. 200,000 rupees for a birth in such a center. So it's being repackaged, but it's being removed from, they've appropriated knowledge, repackaged it. Capitalist market.
I just want to say, because I don't know if you saw yesterday, Lindsay, that someone commented during your roundtable that one of an elderly woman birth attendant who was in one of your slides came and spoke to this person and a group of young medical students about traditional practices. So I just thought that's a nice example in the other direction. Did you? Yeah, we can share with you the name and stuff.
Also, you wanted to
Yeah, let's see. But I like that the discussion goes into the question of power, and I like to talk a little about power and status. But I also want to say that I do believe that these words can talk to each other. I always want to believe in that discussions are possible. And I think what we need here is thinking about how we are sharing space and time and how we should be able to talk. Who is who can talk? Who will be given access to the room to talk? Time, how much time can you talk? I often end up wondering, well, is it time for me to go in or like, and I end up doing that among Sami as well. I remember very much I was invited to a place to finally talk about spirituality. And it didn't work at all because the Northern Sami where I was, they had a completely different system. I'm more used to the South Sami way of like, yeah, you go around and you allow everybody to talk and you cannot break in and just take the room. And you can't, and if you have a person who is actually distributing it for you, we all acknowledge that. And these kind of things is there, oh, do we agree on this first before we go into discussion? Otherwise, probably someone will just take the room and dominate the whole conversation. Yeah, but I do believe that we can talk. I do believe that because I have been working for many years with a dissertation that shows that you can. In my thinking, there are differences, yes, but it's all about knowledge and competencies. And that's what I keep coming back to. I should take back that nothing happened after trying to tell about what I have found out. After my dissertation, I was heavily attacked in the media for from in particular one professor, and he's been attacking me ever after. So talking about stalkers, one of the and so I'm going.
So can I ask what was the critique on your dissertation?
Yes, and it comes here. He's claiming that I'm an essentialist and that I automatically, he keeps coming back to automatically, that I claim I automatically know more because I have come from this area, which I don't. I claim that you need knowledge and competence to be able to access the information. And that might be helpful if you already know the person and has formed a relation to them and spend time and a whole lot of other things. But he keeps coming back to that. And he's again, he's going to, he's using his keynote talks to bring up the matter of Dr. Åsa Kroik's problematic dissertation, which is very flattering in a way. Yeah,
It's better than being ignored.
I've been dealing with these people all my life. But I think what is mostly provocative is that I talk. That is what I come to the conclusion. And what is indeed problematic for me is that nobody take my side. I don't. Those who are, I don't expect someone in a weak position to do that, but I expect my superiors to just state the misunderstanding of he being able to question that I'm a doctor. And that would be it. Yeah, but I'm not the only one in this. I'm not the only one. And it's been going on for a long time, the discussion. Yeah. But binary word views, that's also what it claims, and that is what often comes up. I think we can learn. I do believe in learning. I'm positive about that because you have to listen. Oh, that was feedback. Yeah. Yeah.
Raise your hand.
And Lindsay mentioned yesterday that during a talk that there was the safest place for a woman to give birth is the home. It's safer than. So how do you reconcile that, or how do you manage that with the larger kind of national, health kind of focus on institutional births, for example? How do you reconcile the two? How do you?
Yeah, I didn't get the main question, I think.
So when you know from your work and from your experience that that a home birth is probably the safer option for a woman?
No, I probably wouldn't say that. I would say that a home birth is safer than some institutions. When they had the push for institutional births in the 90s, later on, I think it was around 20 years back, from 2006-07. There's a massive push. I mean, even in the villages where I work, 30 years ago, 95% of births took place at home. And now after 30 years, it's 95% births take place in a hospital or in some institution. So there was this massive push from the government to get women into institutions. There was no corresponding increase in personnel in the health centers. So there's no increase of doctors, nurses, midwives. There was no increase in space. So there was no more beds available. So there was a push of women who would have normally have delivered at home. And what the government did is they give so-called incentive, financial incentive to women to birth in these hospitals. And I call it a big bribe. And it also silences you. Because if you get bad quality care and they pay you, then you keep quiet, you don't protest. So they pushed all these women into institutions which were not prepared, which were not equipped, nor staffed. So that is unsafe. Then it is better to have your baby at home in that situation. A lot of the dyes that at that time I started working with the dyes. We initially felt that the way forward was to organize the dyes, to give them a voice. And there are instances in India of the Dye Sangathan in Gujarat. It's a movement of dyes. It's like a trade union of dyes. And that was what my original plan was. And I mean, this whole development of our own health center and everything, that all stemmed from that, because a lot of the dyes felt that we don't really want to deliver, handle these births at home. If you're on your own, a single woman in a household where there's no electricity, there's no money, there's no water, maybe there's, maybe not a very sympathetic family sometimes. Families are not always very nice. So a lot of the dyes, they felt that we'd rather have our own space where we can be at least there's some support system, there's a network. So, even from the dyes perspective, they didn't want to continue so much with home births. I went to Gujarat to interview a lot of the dyes. I thought there was a contradiction here between the government's push for institutions and the dye, the dye or movement. I thought there would be some contradiction, but actually there wasn't. The dyes were saying, yes, we would also like some sort of institution, some sort of place, but not what you're giving us. They wanted their own space on their own terms, but some semblance of an institution.
Yeah, certainly it goes to what you were saying. Families need support, but the information is leading to a policy that's not giving the proper support that respects the way they are organized as families, certainly.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any more question?
I have to go way back to the beginning about my original question about the placenta and I mean something that occurred to me, maybe this is obvious or implicit, but is this focus on the individual, like Mpume was saying, you know, is this sort of taken for granted within the Western model, and you know that's it's really you know, reproduced, if you will. This idea, there's the mother and there's the baby, and this sort of weird, you know, non-living, is it living, is it not living thing that connects them both, and is it singular or is it multiple? I think is like hard. It's really doesn't fit into that model. So I mean, I was sort of answering my own question about that, but I think it also links. I was thinking about Barry's point yesterday, that you know no one gives birth unassisted, which is not true, right? There's a free birthing movement. I really don't know much about it. I've just been trying to find. There's this. I don't know if she's like on TV or something called the Yorkshire Shepherd or something. Yeah, okay. She's on a television program, Amanda Owen. I think it's a program called Our Yorkshire. And I think she has about 10 children. And I've just heard like radio interviews with her about, you know, being, so I mean, in a way, it's a completely opposite model to the village raising a child. She's in complete isolation on this farm in Yorkshire, from what I understand. I guess with her partner, and she's described having at least one of her children unassisted, sort of woke up in the middle of the night and had already been through the process several times and went down into her living room or whatever and gave birth on her own without waking up her husband or any of her children. But yeah, I'm not sure if these things completely connect, but I think it's this idea about the sort of the discrete individual in isolation and how we relate that to these different models. Births. Yeah, go ahead.
Can I go ahead? Yeah, I mean, we have many stories about that. Where I was and where I am, well, where my home is still is very remote. I don't like the word of remote, but okay, it's very far away from, and maybe you have to keep long, and I would say it depends on your worldview, but according to what I understand and how I feel about it, you're constantly assisted. I mean, you have the spiritual beings, so you cannot be alone. You will have help, but it's depending on what kind of worldview you have.
Yeah, I mean, I realize as I say this too, that like this is, I shouldn't say this is what this Yorkshire farm mum has done, but this is how it's depicted, you know, that she's in isolation, remote, and this sort of like, isn't she crazy kind of thing. Yeah, but I mean, I wonder how much that's this sort of vision, you know, Western media vision of.
Yeah, is that I probably said something that I think that childbirth is considered normal, and
but maybe trying to speak on that maybe and as we are going to an end of the session, and maybe suggest one point where you can wrap up, if each of you say this aspect of individual and collective in a way. And with that, because I think when you bring the aspect that in the cultures where you consider and take seriously these connections, these unseen connections for others, you can see variations of these interpretations. I know that there are some indigenous communities where the pregnant woman goes to the jungle when it's the moment of giving birth and she goes alone. But it doesn't mean she's alone as well. I mean, it's the fact that she goes to this place is already something related with a collective perception. And so maybe I would invite you to make a wrap up in 2 minutes or something. Because we went through many different ways of individual and collective. Can we have individual knowledge? Can we make dialogues and build some kind of mixed knowledge that is not this appropriation of terms and commodification of terms? So maybe I would invite you to can we gestate knowledge that respects some kind of individuality or originality, but still is able to translate culturally? If you want to answer, to react to this, you can, or if you want to say anything else in 2 minutes to that you feel connects with what we all discussed to wrap up.
Yeah, I think from my side, as much as we argue that we are collectivist society, I think at the same time I do worry that individuality can get lost, can be, that can then start to be used to subvert individuality. So it's like between a rock and a hard place in a way, because I think as much as we want this recognition that we're a collectivist society, you can't just, the likelihood is that any attempts to communicate to me directly will fail because I'm nested within this ecosystem of not only other people, but spiritually nature, but at the same time, as an individual, I have a voice. So I think it's just an uncomfortable space, so to speak, where you feel that sometimes maybe just to take from the example that Lindsay was making yesterday, that this Indian woman who is part of this family that wants a boy child, because of the collectivist nature of this whole pregnancy experience. It's not just about her, but it's about the family wanting a boy. So where is her individual space to assert herself, to say, even if it's a girl, I don't want to abort this baby. So I think in closing, although it may sound contradictory, but I think we mustn't lose sight of the, because I think that's how we start to fight back against some of the oppressiveness that's imbued within the cultural belief system, especially for us as women. Yeah.
Yeah. Taking off from birthing alone, in our the villages, the women that I know, they do birth alone, but it's always considered to be, they feel very bad about it. And they like to have, I mean, it seems to be the more the merrier. It's when I used to attend women in home births, there'd be at least 5 or 6 women in that little room with the woman, and it seems to they get some comfort or some feeling, they get some strength from numbers around them, I think. And I've seen even in our health center, I mean, a woman will come for birthing and she may be having 10, 15 people in the vehicle coming with her. They seem to like a lot of people around, you've seen. It's a constant struggle to sort of restrict, so many people. But there's also a power in numbers, and I think that is where now the women that we are working with, we have more than 100 women health workers, and once they are organized to some extent, then their collective voices are heard more. And it's like now, I would say where we are is if you travel on Indian trains, you will see there's maybe 2 inches at the side, and people will come and say, oh, can I just sit here? And they will just sit like with their quarter of a bum sitting there, and they will keep, slowly over the journey, they will keep, you go to the toilet and 6 inches. And I think that's where we are now. We have got 2-3 inches of seat. These silos, I said they're silos, there are cracks in it. It is not that they're sealed. We have, as I say, we have doctors coming to our health center over the last 4 or 5 years. Many doctors who are willing to come to learn. This gives our health workers a big kick that, we're non-literate, semi-literate village women, and we are training now these MBBS doctors. So this gives them some, reason for, it's not all doom and gloom. In other words, I'd like to end up in a non-doom and gloom. And in fact, we are planning to start a fellowship program for doctors from July. It's called, it's a fellowship in social obstetrics, which is, it's about obstetrics which go beyond the womb. So, it's a step. So maybe after next year we'll be 6 inches on the seat. So that's my concluding comment.
Yeah, I'm struggling to say something wise here. But we were into like collective and individual. I think for me it's also striking that we do come from very different places. And where I come from, it's very unpopulated and it's very far away from other people. And I have moved to Stockholm, which is more similar to London, though, and which is also very lonely in a way, and a strong individuality. I have never seen any problem with like that the collective side is taking over the individuality, because everything is possible to us. And what I think is we have so many choices today, like in one way we have, and it's open for us to choose our lives because we do have not a bad income. It's a pretty okay land to live in, but I think it's dangers and possibilities in that. It's difficult to step up and speak for the people because you will get punished from both sides. People will not agree on either, or at least usually that happens to me. So my concluding remark there is we always have to take into account differences, I think.
Thank you very much, Åsa. Thank you, the three of you. Thank you all for being here and online. Those words you had to leave as well. I think it was a very rich conversation. It's recorded and will be available for us to review it and for others to watch it later. Thank you very much, and we hope you keep this conversation open. Thank you.